I have some Brian Higgins news, and I have to thank the lucky the great subscriber that reached out to me and said, "Hey, have you seen this?" I said, "No." What is it? He started to explain to me that there was a video that was released on a channel called the Sons of Liberty podcast. And he said, he's like, I'm listening to it. And all of a sudden, Brian Higgins' names comes up. And he says, my ears perk up. And he starts putting two to two together. So essentially what this is Sons of Liberty, I believe, is they talk about like gun laws and guns on their channel. And Toby Leary owns Cape Cod Gun Works. It's the largest store in Massachusetts, and was talking about a situation when Brian Higgins came into his gun store and essentially was trying to take like paperwork from this guy that he had no reason being involved in. And essentially the owner of the store called their lawyer, and the lawyer basically tells Brian Higgins to go piss off. But we'll play this segment. And I actually reached out to the young men that own this channel. I asked them if I could talk about it, and they said, absolutely, please. So if anybody's, interested in firearms or firearms laws, I would encourage you all to go over and subscribe to the Sons of Liberty. And by the way, this is the setup that they have is like what I want. And I love all the 3 camera positions that they get going. But anyway, let's listen here. And Toby's going to tell the story of Brian Higgins.
I don't even care.
All right. So
this is worth it. This is crazy.
I had an ATF agent and so the guys who do those inspections they're called IOIs. They're investigative officers and inspectors, right?
I'm just curious.
Let me just give context to what's going to happen here. Essentially, Brian Higgins showed up and was trying to check documentations. I guess there was a young lady that had come in. She had taken all her safety courses. She was interested in purchasing a firearm. And I think someone was like with her there. And Brian Higgins thought it was called, I think they call them a straw purchase, where someone will actually go in, buy a gun, and then hand it to someone. And then they take the gun. And that was not the case. And you're going to hear about it here.
Do they feel bad? Like, are they ever like just
imagine being
like
that
sorry
guy?
about
Yeah.
this? But we have
Kinda,
to?
yeah, they actually are.
Okay.
Those ATF agents are like, we're just doing our job. We've got to make sure this gun lines up with this serial number in this book and this 4473 to this guy, and his license is correct and his address was right and his signature's on the page, and you have your, employee signature too, and all that, right? And again, they can't even keep.
Yeah, I'm going to get there, Scott. Don't worry.
Themselves,
I'm
but
getting
they
there.
require us to, and we do.
I have the switcher. I just need to hook it up.
So they do the inspections.
And then I need a producer.
Then they write up
exactly. Yeah.
Now,
so
I'll pay you
send that to your
$50 to come
director, and then the director
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
action will be taken. A letter, a warning conference, or a revocation hearing. And so that happens once a year.
A little bit, but he does talk about.
And
Brian.
then the other side of it is enforcement. So there's the ATF enforcement side, which are actively doing investigations into the biker gang or the Crips and the Bloods with guns, or the nefarious people out there that legitimately do evil with guns. But
that is,
they also wear a big bat. And so funny story is we had an investigation going on a few years ago. It was actually a pretty well-known investigation. It was in the newspapers of a guy who was in the police academy to become a cop, who purchased a Glock pistol from our store and from another store by showing a police ID and signing our law enforcement affidavit that he had powers of arrest. And turns out he was just a dispatcher. And so we can't sell Glock pistols, the number 1 selling handgun in America, to regular citizens because the Attorney General deemed them too dangerous. So that whole list of guns I told you about, the Attorney General's regulations, they determined that Glock pistols do not meet the Attorney General's regulations. But then they exempted police departments and police from the Attorney General's regulations. So if that doesn't stink of hypocrisy, I don't know what does, because they're saying it's too unsafe for you to own, but yet we're going to give them to cops in their official duties, and also they can own them personally. But if they're that unsafe, why do we want to give them to cops? Well, because they're really not unsafe. We just don't trust you with the most popular handgun in America. And this is our way of doing a backdoor gun ban. So you can't buy Glocks, but you can as a cop. So this guy who's going through the police academy flashed his thing. And when he's in the police academy, the police chief looks at him and says, "Hey, that looks like a new Glock. Where'd you get that?" "Oh, I got it at Cape Gunworks."
Here we go.
"What? You can't do that. You can't buy that. You're not a sworn officer yet." So this police chief launches an investigation
Here we
and
go.
charges the kid with, unlawful possession of a firearm for straw purchase stuff and gets the
I don't know,
ATF
Jody.
involved.
Wow.
So the ATF comes down to us to get the form, the 4473. He shows us his credentials. And some of you might know who this ATF agent is if you watched a very high profile trial that just took place in Massachusetts. So the agent's name was Brian Higgins. And so he's in our shop to get this form, and he's watching us conduct business. And he sees a girl at the counter buying a gun. She's doing her paperwork, doing all that. And her boyfriend walks in and, whispers in her ear, and she points over there, and then he walks away. And this guy's observing this whole thing. And then she finally gets her gun and she leaves. And he says, "I need to see that 4473. And I'm like, I've never been in this position before. I don't just feel comfortable turning over my customers' information to law enforcement agencies just because they ask for it.
Yeah. You need a warrant.
So I'm like, yeah, I think there's a warrant and or a subpoena at the very least, that there's some ongoing investigation. So I bring the form into my general manager, and I go in the other room and I ask Brendan, my business partner, I said, "Do we have to give federal forms to the ATF upon demand?" And he goes, "I don't think so, but let me call our lawyer." We have a lawyer that
so good.
is on call about this type of stuff, especially interactions with the ATF. So he calls him, and this guy used to be one of the directors of the Boston field office of the ATF.
I'm going to pause just here for a second. This guy is so smart. He didn't fold. He went in and asked appropriate questions, because usually, people would just get scared, Maz, and go, "Oh, here's the paperwork. Here, take it." This guy said, "No, wait a minute. I don't have to give a law enforcement agent someone's address and paper. They have no probable cause here."
Yeah.
So he went in, he confirmed it with like he said, his GM, and essentially, you're going to hear the anecdote to this story here. But I think this probably was, Jody is asking, when was this? This was probably earlier in his career, because I think he owns his own place now. So this may be when he was working for someone. But it's an interesting story. Here's the anecdotes coming up here. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So he knows his stuff, right? So he calls him, and meanwhile, while we're off to the side talking, this ATF agent goes into my manager's office and says, "I need to see that form." So my manager doesn't know any better, and he hands it over, and he's taking pictures of it and writing down information off this form. And then he walks back out. I come out, and Brendan is on the phone with the lawyer, and the lawyer says, and I'll keep it a G rating here, but he says, "Tell him to go bleep himself." And so Brendan comes out and says, "Yeah, we're not going to give you that information. I'm sorry. Come back with a warrant or a subpoena or something like that, and we'll be glad to oblige. But we don't feel comfortable giving out confidential information just on a fishing expedition by you." And he goes, "What?" He hits the moon. "No one has ever denied me that form. And that's ATF property. Those forms are ATF property." And we're like, "No, they're actually not. We have to retain them as records for 20 years, forever." And he's like, "Nope, that's my property. I can inspect them whenever I want. I want to see that now. And by the way, I already looked at it in your manager's office, so I already got what I need, but you don't tell me no." He was really upset.
So he told you that he already got it?
Yeah, he told us that he already got it. I'm like, "Well, I didn't give you permission or authorize you to do that. And, frankly, I think you're overstepping your bounds here. And we're very pro-police. We'll help any investigation, but I believe you're on a fishing expedition, and you just don't like the color of the skin or what that person looked like who's at the counter buying a gun. Frankly, that's what I think happened here." And he goes, you don't know why I'm asking for it. And I said, well, I'm just calling it like I see it. And we internally knew this wasn't a straw purchase. If he was making the argument that she was buying the gun for the boyfriend or something like that, that's what he was implying. And I said, nope, that's not the situation. This girl has been in multiple times, has gone out on the range with an instructor to select a handgun that fits her hand, that one she likes, that, meets the requirements that she has. She's, test fired it. She's narrowed it down and then ultimately made a selection. And today is the day she's picking it up. This is not a straw purchase. And, so he's like, well, I'm not going to talk to you about what an ongoing investigation. So he gets back to his office, and his director just got reamed out by my lawyer who used to work for that office. And he basically tells him, you got to make this right. You got to cover your butt because you're exposed now. You're out there in the wind without any legal protection because you're, demanding this. And so he goes and assembles a grand jury to investigate this girl.
This is unreal.
For a straw purchase. And comes back to us with a subpoena on a Saturday or Sunday morning. I can't remember what day it was, when we have a instructor here from New York to teach a class to like 14 people. People have driven from like Connecticut and Rhode Island and all over Massachusetts to be in this class. And he shows up with like 8 police cars, and he walks in and he disarms everyone in the store. Like, you can't be in the store with me with a gun. I want your gun. And like, so my employees are kind of like, what do I do? And so he's like, you got to, unload your gun and I'll hold on to it while you're in the store. And by the way, I want everyone out anyway. You can't be in the building with me at the same time while I'm conducting my investigation. And he has a subpoena for the hard drive of our video camera surveillance system. So he can sit there and watch the world go by in 30-second clips, around that day. But he doesn't just ask for the clips for that day. He takes the whole server out of the building.
Wow.
Wow.
This could have been done by just him walking in that one closet, which is like a 4x6 closet, but he shut down the entire operation of the building, and with like 8 cruisers parked out front. So it looks like we're,
Can you pause this for 1 second?
selling machines.
Yeah, we can.
When was this filmed? This interview filmed?
This got dropped yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So I'm guessing, and I know everybody's asking, when was this? When's that? I don't know when the timeline was. There's really no context to it. But he said, I talked to my general manager. He owns a store, so I'm thinking this is probably a little earlier in his gun career, maybe when he worked for someone. But this guy's the owner, and he said, I talked to my GM, so I'm thinking this is probably a little earlier in his career. But it's interesting. You have power trip. You have not the fact of not wanting to be denied. We've seen a temper. It's interesting.
Yeah. All characteristics that are very much in play in the Karen Reed, John O'Keefe case.
Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Yep.
I'll try to get some more background on it. I'll reach out to the young men that I reached out today to play this video. They were very kind. Said, please play it. And if you can get people to subscribe to their channel, that would be great. And see if I can get a little bit more context on it. And maybe I'll reach out to Mr. Leary and see if I can get him up here and explain the situation in depth. That would be really great. All right, we'll listen to this. We'll end this, and we'll go to Jennifer McCabe.
Guns, kids out the back door, and so
that's great.
All that to really just throw his weight around and peacock out and say, "I'm the guy. You don't ever tell me no. Don't you ever forget it." And so he did that to cover his butt because, and then once they found out, oh yeah, it wasn't a straw purchase, they just closed the investigation and went on his business as usual. So it was crazy. But
how do you not sue them over that?
Amy, thank you.
Because technically he got a subpoena, so technically it was legal.
Right. Yeah, technically it was. And frankly, it was a small price to pay for a cool story, if you ask me. Like,
for sure.
You know what I mean? Like, not that I would ever want to go through that again.
Yeah.
But it just shows the level of tyranny that'll happen. And that's what makes me a little nervous about saying there's not any cops that'll enforce this, because cops will do things that aren't constitutional. And frankly, you know, that makes me a little nervous.
Well,
Just
and
following orders, you know.
And it's dangerous too, because what happens when you get a gun store or somebody who's not as willing to go along with the ATF? Like, what if somebody's like, no, actually, like, this is unconstitutional? Not that I'm not saying, I don't know how many of those. I'm sure there's some people who are willing to take a stand at that level, and it's like now you're gonna have like you could have a standoff at some level, and it's like that's dangerous. Like that, people could lose lives. You could have like a Waco situation or things like that.
The reason Gun Owners Action League called this bill the Lawful Gun Owner Imprisonment Act is the scenario.
I'm not going to get into the laws here, but I just wanted to play that story about Higgins. If anybody's interested in the video, I'll drop it in the chat. And it starts at about, the conversation about Higgins starts at 52:30 in that video. So I just find it interesting. And I think I'm going to reach out to Mr. Leary, see if I can get him on the show and have him talk a little bit more in depth and get some some context a little bit more behind that encounter. Because I find those traits, attitude, pushback, being denied, flipping out. Gee, it's just a lot of that stuff we heard in the Canton scenario. So